And in just a few hours from now, halfway between Moscow and Washington in Anchorage, Alaska, the world will watch a meeting that could redraw maps and rewrite alliances. Now, US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin face to face with no Ukrainians, no Europeans, no mediators in the room. Now, the White House calls it a listening exercise. Critics, however, call it a backroom deal in the making. On the table, the future of the Ukraine war, the fate of European security. Now, so tonight we ask, is this a path to peace or a dangerous precedent that rewards force? And who walks away stronger from the optics alone? Joining me from Philadelphia, from Moscow, and from Ukraine, three voices with unique vantage points on what exactly is at stake. So I'm going to start with you, and let me introduce my guest, Michael Jones from the White House. He's a White House speechwriter to ex-US President George Bush, an American, sort of commentator and policy analyst. So thanks for joining us. He joins us from Philadelphia. Yeah, hi. Fred Weir, he's a journalist again and a political analyst. And his location, of course, is Moscow. He's joining us all the way from Moscow, Russia. And we're also joined by Oleg Dunda. He's a member of the Ukrainian parliament. Thanks, Oleg, for joining us. High stakes, big meeting, big announcements, of course, expected later tonight or not. One doesn't know. But what's your expectation from this summit? Let me just go do a round robin with all of you. What do you expect? Because your perspectives are going to be very, very different. Let me start with you, Michael. If you could give us a perspective of how exactly is Mr. Trump going into this meeting?
Going in with the recognition that the conversation itself is an accomplishment, getting Putin to the table is a constructive development, but understanding, I think, in world affairs, we have issues that are, of practical clarity and then issues of moral clarity. I think there is an issue of moral clarity here. This war never should have started. President Trump is correct about that. It was largely a product of Biden's mismanagement of it, provocative statements that were made about NATO's expansion, considerable errors in judgment, I think, made by the prior administration. However, ultimately, the United States did not launch this invasion. It was launched by Putin and Russia, and it's proven enormously costly to both sides. I mean, now with 1 million Russian casualties, tens of thousands of Ukrainian casualties, extraordinary billions of sums of dollars, sizable numbers of Ukrainians who've fled the country. What really has been accomplished on either side? Almost nothing. The issue is to stop the bleeding and to see if the United States, with I think its considerable and enhanced influence with both Russia and Ukraine, can play a very constructive role with President Trump in ending the bloodshed and restoring an acceptable conclusion to both sides. And it's important to recognize that while Ukraine is not, and President Zelensky is not represented in this meeting today, ultimately there is a second component to it if things are successful later today, which of course is consumption. We shouldn't overestimate expectations, but if it is successful, it's still going to require, and as it obviously needs to, Ukrainian approval of the terms of those agreements. And that might even be the more complex second component of the ongoing diplomacy at work here.
But by his own admission, Trump has said that there is a 25% chance that this summit will may not or may go poorly. And then he says he will know, and then, all things are off the table. So he's not going in very confident that he can come out with a deal here.
I think you've got to look at diplomacy, and the art of the deal, that all the rhetoric that goes into a meeting of this nature, has a political dimension to it. It would be a great error of judgment for the president to go in and state unequivocally that you can anticipate what the outcome is going to be of a meeting of this nature. I think a lot of the parameters of a settlement actually have been agreed upon. I would say a sizable number of them, well over the lion's share, well over 50%. Much of the work has been done, and no competent foreign policy would send a leader of the free world into a summit of this nature without some reasonable expectation that there would be progress. You saw the failure that Biden had and his aides had, with, for instance, China during that administration. Those are disastrous results. But ultimately, and this is the risk of any diplomacy and of any summit, it requires two people's cooperation, and it requires goodwill on both parts. Now, are we to assume goodwill and constructive engagement to Putin? That history suggests that that's a mixed experience, and we'll see today about what he's prepared to do. But I would say this war is immensely costly to Putin politically, and it's proven enormously costly to Russia. And it's
let me get in the perspective from Moscow, and then I will come to you from and to get the perspective from Ukraine, Mr. Ridha. But from Moscow, Mr. Weir, you are based out of Moscow. You are. What's your sense? Do you believe that Mr. Putin has gone into this meeting or has flown to Alaska thinking that there is going to be an outcome at the end of this? Because from what we've seen, he doesn't really seem to be taking Trump very seriously with his constant flip-flops.
Well, I did a scene setter yesterday for my newspaper, and I canvassed a whole number of Russian foreign policy experts, well-connected ones, and none of them is completely sure what to expect. This is very much Putin's initiative. He's put aside a lot of previous stipulations, and he clearly, at least they all seem to believe, there is some outline agreement that was reached between Putin and Trump's emissary, Steve Witkoff, last Thursday, or a week ago in the Kremlin. So if that is the case, that there was an agreement in principle, perhaps a territorial division that Trump and Putin would sign on to and then try to sell to Ukraine, leaving some of the other issues, about Ukrainian neutrality, the nature of the Ukrainian state, things that were considered war priorities by Russia. If they are to be left to further negotiations, well, that leaves a lot of Russian experts are quite discombobulated by it. So this is Putin's initiative to go there to Anchorage. He hasn't necessarily set aside Russian war objectives, but he seems to be willing to go meet with Trump. There's some confidence that there is an agreement in waiting to be made. And I think beyond the Ukraine war, Russia has a priority, a very strong priority, to normalize its relationship with the United States. They have very high hopes of returning
But sorry, I was listening to Trump when he was on board Air Force One just a while ago, and he very clearly said that yes, that Mr. Putin is coming with a huge entourage. There are, he probably wants to do business with the US, and yes, we will get down to business. Trump has also increased his entourage. Now there are the business secretary, the treasury secretary. A lot of people are traveling with him now, unlike earlier. It's going to be, but he said very clearly that nothing happens before Putin ends the Ukraine war. How do you think that's going to play out with President Putin when Trump puts this as a precondition?
Well, the Russians will not agree to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, which is what Ukraine and the Europeans want. They will not accept that. They believe that even if you have a ceasefire and the lines freeze, there will be no further negotiations, and they have other issues. They also believe that Ukraine would use that ceasefire to rearm and regroup, and that therefore is a path to more war and not peace. So that will certainly be ruled out. But some interim agreements, some agreements about an air truce or sectoral ceasefires, things. Apparently, Putin is coming with a toolbox of offers to dial back the war, confidence-building measures. But he also is coming with a big delegation, including a finance minister, Kirill Dmitriev, who is a special economic advisor who's been pursuing that parallel track of diplomacy. I think that even if it's a failure in terms of settling Ukraine or coming to some kind of outline agreement for Ukraine, if it succeeds in furthering the US-Russia dialogue, setting up some kind of potential economic cooperation down the road, the Russians will consider it a success.
All right. Just one quick follow-up question on that. What do you think is, you talked about some confidence-building measures that Putin is taking to Trump. Could you list out a few of these confidence-building measures? And then I want to go to Mr. Junda and ask him if these will be, and if Ukraine would be in agreement with these, because Ukraine is not at the table. It's become a US-Russia summit about a war that's being fought in Ukraine.
Yes, well, I mentioned an air truce. This is something the Russians have been bandying around a bit. There is an enormous exchange of ordnance every night. Both Ukrainians and Russians are firing drones at each other's cities. And it's incredibly damaging. And it's also the most visible thing. You read about it the most in the newspapers. So Putin will perhaps suggest a moratorium on using drones against each other's cities and economic targets, and that could then lead to to a broader ceasefire or broader negotiations. But Putin has been, at least, and we don't know what his mindset is. He's almost as unpredictable as Trump sometimes, and he's the guy who decides. But he has been adamant in the past that he wants what he calls the root causes of the war settled before he stops fighting. These are Russia's basic war goals. They've been fighting for well over 3 years. Whatever you think about it, that these are their objectives: to obtain Ukrainian neutrality, to no NATO membership, substantial demilitarization of Ukraine, and rights for Russian speakers, and a few other things. And these were always mentioned as priorities in Russian policy, even before territorial demands were.
What about land swap, which has been hinted at by Donald Trump? Is a land swap, if it happens, it's obviously, again, Putin has put out his red lines very, very clearly, that these are the territories that I've already taken. These are the territories that stay with me. That becomes a problem for Ukraine, which does not want to cede any territory. And at that point, that of course will be thrashed out at the summit. But let me bring in Mr. Junda. He's a Ukrainian member of parliament, to just get an understanding of the Ukrainian part of this entire conversation. You've heard Mr. Weir, Mr. Junda. What's your sense? Where is this going? What are your expectations?
It's very easy. I don't have any expectation about this meeting, about this summit in Alaska. Why? Because for now, we don't have any point of compromise between Russia and Ukraine. I can explain you. We need to understand what's the Russian goals in this war. For last 3 years, all speakers in Kremlin, they repeatedly say every time the same. We need to solve root causes of this war. What does it mean? It's not about Ukraine. I would remind you, this is full invasion war started after Russian ultimatum in December of 2021. What is this ultimatum? What is this ultimatum? It was not about Ukraine. It was about NATO. It was about influence in Europe. It was about Cold War. So all speakers last 3 years in Kremlin, they talked about they need to reconsider result of Cold War, and for them, Ukraine, it's instrument to reconsider result of Cold War. Nobody in the whole world could believe Putin last 20 years can sleep without dreaming about Pokrovsk or Mariupol or Slavyansk. He doesn't need this city. They need to return in 80 in 20th century and have influence in Europe. They need to push back American troops, American influence from Europe. And this situation, I have just one warnings about this summit. It's warnings when Putin and his team could propose Trump's to start process to develop new agreement on arms control in Europe. It's just shape of new agreement about to change influence to divide Europe to divide influence in Europe and to return in Russian influence Eastern Europe in this situation. Nobody in Kremlin will choose to have Pokrovsk or Slavyansk and stop this war and have ceasefire. And it's for Russian. It's finish for their goals and his movement. So I don't.
What about
Yeah.
Ukraine? How are Ukrainians? How are Ukrainians, and specifically those in power, including Zelensky? What do they expect out of this summit? Do they expect? I mean, if you could sum it up in a couple of lines.
I wouldn't describe like Ukrainian people waiting for some. Yes, of course we have hopes for ceasefire, but we live in reality and understand this is chance for ceasefire. Any ceasefire is very low. So now we don't have that trouble situation when our front line could be ruined. And we will not give up, and we are ready to fight further. So we don't have any warm hopes on this summit.
You don't have any warm hopes. What if there is a land swap deal that is signed between Trump and Putin? Will Ukraine accept it?
No, of course not.
What will you do after that?
We will have a discussion with our European partners because from United States we need now for our defense just 2 points. First of all, it's space grouping, space satellites, and the second it's missiles for Patriot. All arms, all supporting and other supporting we can have from our European partners. So we don't have not wrong bad situation on the front line right now.
But a couple of months ago, just for a brief period after that spat that Trump had with Zelensky in the Oval Office, and a couple of weeks after that, Trump withdrew all sort of intel from Ukraine and stopped supply of weapons briefly. There was a furor. It's not that Ukraine, if the US stops supplying arms and intelligence to Ukraine for the war, it's how are you going to continue the war?
It's big discussion for big program because in 2022 we had war ideology of 20th century. After these 3 years in 2025, we have a new war strategy. All strategy is finished. Now all big arms weaponry like tanks, artillery on our front lines useless. Totally
Right.
useless. This is now started war unmanned technology. In this technology, Ukraine industry, military industry, Ukraine army, we are very competitive, like in Russia. I would say now in the world, not in Europe, in the world, we have just two competitive current modern army. It's Ukrainian and Russian army. And for that, I would say European troops, European armies, and American armies need change themselves very fast because your old, not your Western troops. Western troops are not competitive on current front line. So in this situation, they can stand, and they can stand very long. I would compare now situation in Ukraine like Ukraine, it's Maginot Lines in 1940 in France, which can be ruined, but we can be beat from backline.
Interesting. Let me just bring in Michael Jones here, and then I'm going to come to you, Abhijit. I know you've joined our conversation. Abhijit Iyer-Mitra is joining us, friends, in just a bit. He's Senior Fellow, Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, and of course, a global commentator. But Abhijit, I'll come to you. I want to go to Michael Jones with this. Michael, so Ukraine will not accept any deal coming out of Alaska. That's what we are hearing from the Ukrainian member of parliament here. How would you respond to that? What do you think Trump will do if Ukraine says no?
Well, as I said earlier, there are two components to this, meaning you could have a very successful engagement with Putin today, and ultimately, this is not just an issue of political sentiment in Ukraine. I mean, my understanding of the Ukrainian constitution, it specifically prohibits a ceding of territory. So, for instance, hypothetically, if you said Crimea and the Donbass were going to be ceded to Russia, I think that presents a constitutional question, not just a political question within Ukraine. And I will say, on the political dimension, support for the war in both countries, understandably, has drastically diminished. There is a lot of bravado talk by heads of state, but ultimately, these heads of state, in complex political environments, are still accountable to their people. And the sentiment in Russia, the sentiment in Ukraine, and enthusiasm for this conflict is very minimal. It's gone on. It's stalemated. Russia's not going to roll over Kiev as it might have anticipated in 2022. And Russia is a legitimate force in the world stage. It's not going away. It's a nuclear power. That's why the dialogue and the diplomacy are the essential component to it, and appealing to the extent that the U.S. is able to do so to the fact that we, as a matter of practical foreign policy consideration and emphatic, pound the table position, need and want this war to end. There will not be, for instance, any additional enhanced relationship with Russia, for all the promise, I agree, that exists for that relationship, until this war ends. So if you come out of this summit and the war is continuing, it's just diminished lost opportunity for Russia, whose economy, frankly, is struggling immensely right now. Both countries.
Yeah, but if I just open the mic for Fred Weir, then he will say that the Russian economy is not struggling. Correct me if I'm wrong, Fred. These sanctions that have come on India on Russian oil for India, that might tilt the balance in Putin's, in Trump's favor. But so far, Russia has been very categorically saying that the sanctions have not really hurt us as much as is being touted by the Western media. Please.
Well, look, very quickly, I live in the Russian economy. I do the weekly shopping. I go to the restaurant. I drive around Moscow and see all kinds of civilian construction projects going on. And they're big projects that absorb steel, manpower, heavy machinery. And although the shape of the market has changed, the basket of goods available has changed more. We have more Iranian stuff, more Chinese stuff, no European stuff, but we still have the same basket of goods, and prices have gone up. There is inflation, but it's not prohibitively great. So I got to say, I can't, as a foreign journalist, try to look into the shape of the war economy. It's not a safe thing for me to do, but I don't have to. Even big, rich, democratic countries, when they go to war, full war, they impose rationing in the civilian section to ensure priority for military effort and production. There's no rationing here going on here in Russia. People say the economy is cooling, and that's probably true. Last year, they were saying the economy is overheating, and that was probably true. But as far as I can see, if people are banking on some kind of collapse or faltering of the Russian economy, they're deluding themselves.
Yeah, I
All
don't think
right, so
anyone
there
wants
you
to
go.
see that.
Yeah.
I don't think, I don't think there's any interest in, and I think it's important to reinforce. I mean, neither in a military, political, or economic dimension, I think widely held sentiment in the United States is we'd like to, see improved relations with Russia. However, you've got this barrier right in the middle of the road. Until the barrier is removed, the idea of enhanced commercial relationships, the idea of enhanced political relationships, the idea of all this opportunity that could potentially exist is just simply being delayed, and it's unnecessary. And I think emphatically, this is a widely held sentiment for different reasons in Russia and Ukraine, that this war has gone on too long. It probably should never have been launched in the first place. I think in fairness to the whole situation, a bit of blame at least needs to be placed on the Biden administration for these provocative comments about potentially admitting Ukraine into NATO. I was heavily involved, as you know, in the end of the Cold War. I recall the commitments that James Baker and the administration made to Mikhail Gorbachev then about not an inch forward. James Baker famously said that we wanted to permit German reunification. We wanted that unified Germany to have an option, if they so chose, to join NATO. But that NATO was a defensive alliance. That the end of the Cold War was an era of an extraordinary promise for peace. And then subsequently, what happened? I mean, for several years, there was no expansion of NATO. Then starting in 1999, under Clinton, you've had over a dozen countries that have been admitted into NATO. And I think, I think Putin is well aware. I don't think we need to clarify the fact that there is no military, offensive nature to NATO. I think that's been made clear. It's been reinforced even in agreements with NATO that Russia is not perceived as an enemy of NATO, or that is the focus of it. It's a defensive structure. However, its expansion, you have to think on a political dimension, is exactly the one compromise to Gorbachev's credit that he made, because I can remember 1989 as it showed all the signs that not just that the Cold War was going to end, but that the Soviet Union as it existed was going to implode and cease to exist, as it did cease to exist. The Soviet flag lowered above the Kremlin for the last time, December 31, 1991. That extraordinary development, the question just from an American perspective is, beginning in 1989, we started to say, well, if this is the ultimate outcome, how do you prevent or deter or incentivize the Soviet Union not to just...
I hear you. I hear you, sir. But I hear you, sir. What are the concessions?
We made these verbal commitments frankly, that that we were prepared to respect Russian autonomy and not present any offensive military threat. And I think, to some extent, if there is any blame that goes beyond the actual aggressors in this conflict, of which the U.S. is not really a party to it, it has to lie with that
What
violation.
What concessions you have spent time at the White House and during the George Bush tenure? What concessions do you think Trump will make for Putin. He understands this history. He's very categorically said no NATO for Ukraine. That's what I heard him say on the on board the Air Force One, which is the last comment he's made. So what concessions are on the table then for Putin from the American side?
Well, I think what we're going to articulate is, simply that there is an extraordinary upside potential for the enhancement of this relationship. I think we're going to probably, as we should, reiterate that countries that have gone into the sort of relationship that Putin has now forged with the CCP in China have come to regret it. I think Putin, understanding Putin as I understand him, which I think is reasonably decent, is going to come to really have deep concerns about the alliance that Russia is entered into now as a product of that relationship, which I think it entered into out of a sense of necessity, not as out of a sense of free will. And so this, like I said, the issues of moral clarity, issues of strategic practicality, and the complexities are the strategic practicality, because ultimately, the end of this war requires Zelensky and Putin, two individuals that themselves have been erratic. I don't think this country's policy has been erratic. Our policy has shifted, and the verbiage has shifted from President Trump, but it's shifted as the dynamics have shifted. I mean, Zelensky was dressed down in the Oval Office, as you correctly recalled, several months ago. Then, that was the ideal opportunity for Putin to have stepped in, seized the opportunity to end this war on terms that probably could have been more favorable to him then than they might be now. He didn't take that opportunity, and when he didn't take that opportunity, it would have been a gross error for this administration not to have adjusted its policy accordingly. And this president would have been frankly criticized if he hadn't adjusted the policy. So I think the adjustment of, it's incorrect to say that this president has been inconsistent. The one consistency is that we are not going to take a position of validating or supporting this war over the Donbass and Crimea and what roughly 18% of Ukraine. There is no vital U.S. interest at stake, but U.S. interest, if I could define it, are damaged whenever there's conflict in the world. Conflict is not a beneficiary.
Yeah, but Putin has come to the table now, finally, and you said 18%
It took steps. It's important to realize he's coming to the table not because somehow he woke up one day and had a change of mindset. He's coming to the table because U.S.-led policy in the world, which, as you know, particularly in India, has not been all that well received, but we have exercised critical levers of influence that have brought him to the table. And ultimately, the entire world could be the beneficiary of that. Meaning, my message being, don't look at this in a short-term perspective. Look at it in the long-term perspective and realize that if this war is brought to an end.
So we've heard from you, sir, and we will come back to you on how this impacts Trump domestically if the summit doesn't go right. But we will talk about that in a bit. But we've heard from you the American perspective, we've heard the Russian perspective, we've even heard the Ukrainian perspective. Let me bring in Abhijit Iyer-Mitra from New Delhi. He's been following. I want to ask you, Abhijit, one simple question. And we heard from Michael Jones that Putin is going into this meeting weekend. Would you agree with that? I mean, he's really not got that much of an advantage now as opposed to, let's say, a few months ago when Zelensky was given the dressing down in Oval Office. You're in mute, Abhijit. You'll have to just fix yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So, the term weakened is so relative. Maybe he's weakened compared to 2 months ago where Zelensky got that shellacking in the Oval Office. But he's quite a bit pumped up from, say, August of last year when the Democrats were in power. Right. So these strengths are relative. Second, given the situation Russia is in uh, any kind of Western engagement is a positive for them. The way Putin would be selling this back home would be, look, I finally got them to the negotiating table. Uh,
Hmm.
Before, Ukraine's sovereignty was not negotiable. Today, Ukraine's sovereignty is negotiable. Even though Trump has just put out a statement saying, on Air Force One, saying that, I'm not there to negotiate for Ukraine, the fact
Yeah.
remains he is there to negotiate for Ukraine. So, all up, I don't see where uh, the weakness is. Uh, Far from it. If Putin concedes anything today, Russian leaders have a very bad history of getting bumped off if they concede. Tsar Nicholas conceded. Look what happened to him. Tsar Peter
Hmm.
III conceded to the to Frederick the Great, and look what
Hmm.
his wife did to him. So it's a repeat pattern. Russia is very unforgiving of people who sign uh, peace treaties that don't favor them. They're quite forgiving, on the other hand, of people like, say, Stalin, who killed millions of them as long as they win a war.
Hmm. Okay. Can Sorry, I'm not getting your voice, Abhijit. Are you speaking?
No, I'm
Okay.
not.
Sorry,
I
sorry,
didn't.
sorry. No, my screen just moved away for a second. So I have a simple question from the global south perspective, and since John also mentioned the India perspective, and Trump, do you believe that if there is some kind of a deal that is reached, whatever form shape it takes between the US and between US and Russia, do you think there will be implications for this growing BRICS unity vis-a-vis Trump tariffs?
Look.
We heard
How
that you're tariffing India 50% for buying Russian oil, and on the other hand, there you are trading with Russia yourself,
Aditi?
which is still good,
How politically incorrect am I allowed to be? Um,
relatively.
Okay, look, we're happy if the war ends, but we're also quite happy if the war continues. Let's be very clear about this. There have been certain windfalls that have happened because of the war, just like with Iran, when JCPOA, pre-JCPOA sanctions were there on Iran, it was again a windfall period for India. Now, understand BRICS unity. Russia has wanted that unity for a very long time to balance off against China. The issue, of course, is China is not being tariffed at the moment. Tariffs are being deliberately kept low. So why would China then? China has a long history of tagging India along and dumping us. If you remember, India wanted the collective bargaining power for the Paris emission standards. America and China then did a deal, and India got the royal dump by China later on. India did not. India still has not negotiated emission standards and things like that. So that lesson went down very, very badly at our Ministry of External Affairs. Uh, there is no push. There is a sort of uh, uh, push for the sake of show. All five BRICS leaders holds hand and sing Kumbaya. But other than that, other than public shows of unity, I don't see any coordinated unity on the ground. The five economies are very, very different. China is a massive consumer economy. Russia is a major commodity supply economy. China is into manufacturing. Brazil has certain manufacturing sectors very, very globally relevant, like, say, Embraer, where China has not been able to break into the market, which is civil aviation and things like that. So, very different economies, very different synergies, possibly even no synergies at times.
Got it, got it. Sorry, I'm just gonna cut in there, Abhijit, because you're sort of moving away from the summit in Alaska, and I will come back because this is an important issue, the India-China synergy and the BRICS synergy, and we will have a separate conversation on this. But tell me, from the global south perspective, what is it that and that is the big expectation from this summit as far as the global south is concerned, and I largely mean India, China, Brazil, and of course other nations who are now part of BRICS.
first, I think their biggest joint expectation will be the hope that this war actually dies down now, or at least some kind of a ceasefire can be reached. Uh, that I would say is a general global South perspective. There are, of course, nuances. India is happy either way. China has different interests and so on and so forth. But if you were to announce a general declaration of peace, uh, that would generally be quite welcome across the board. The problem, of course, is I don't see how the peace can happen. This is one of those things where both Zelensky and Putin have tied their, they've pegged their flags to poles which are impossible to come back from or climb down from. Any swap of land, imagine how that refracts back onto Zelensky politically back home. Similarly, Putin, if he agrees to a land swap after claiming the whole of Ukraine, what happens there? If Putin accepts the principle of sovereignty for Ukraine, that rump Ukraine can then join NATO, how do you think the Russian public will react after so many years of war? If similarly, if Zelensky says, I accept that we're not going to join NATO ever, and writes it into the Ukrainian constitution, how do you think Ukrainian people are going to react in the face of so many deaths, so much destruction? I don't think. I'll tell you the one concrete outcome of this meeting. They will agree to meet again.
They will agree to meet again. Yes, that Trump has already pointed to it, that he said that this is the first meeting, and then the next meeting is, of course, going to be with Zelensky and with probably some European leaders on the table. But let's, we don't know what's going to happen. As someone was pointing out to me earlier, both of them are, fairly erratic people and fairly people who know what they want and they go after it. It's going to be a tough meeting, clearly. But I've taken time from you only till 9 o'clock. So I'm just going to do a round robin and go around. And because we don't know the outcome of the meeting, so we will meet again after the meeting. But right now, in terms of optics, and if you could give me quick answers, just one round robin on that. In terms of optics, who has won so far? Because global this meeting, the diplomacy, geopolitics is also about narratives and about in terms of narrative, has Putin won or has Trump won so far in terms of coming together to meet in Alaska, the optics of it? And let me go with you first, Mr. Jones.
I encourage not to look at it in terms of winners and losers. This war has been enormously
purely in terms of optics. Purely in terms of optics.
It is a victory.
Not winners and losers, the gainer, the bigger gainer of the
undeniable victory for United States diplomacy, meaning the levers that needed to be exerted were exerted. That's why Putin is going to be in Anchorage today. Absent the success of the foreign policy of the United States, Vladimir Putin would not be in Anchorage, Alaska today. But it is an error of judgment to view this in those terms. 1 million dead Russians, tens of thousands of dead Ukrainians. The idea that some victor has emerged from this stalemated military situation over areas that are not deemed by most of the world to be of incredible strategic value is just an absolute misrepresentation. And I think it's a disservice also even to Prime Minister Modi. I don't think Modi is looking to exploit situations like a war. I think that's unfair. I think you've got, frankly, the greatest prime minister since independence, who I think is for the first time really exerting some degree, at least, of moral dimension in his assessment of the world situation. I don't think he's under any illusions about Putin or Xi Jinping in China. And I think that that's encouraging because I think it represents a lot of upside for the entire world, but most importantly, I think, as part of that, for the United States relationship with India, ultimately. And I think that Modi has really done largely a constructive job, and I think he's proving responsive to U.S. concerns. I know he is confidentially that he's proving responsive, and that's it's a good relationship with a few hurdles and this is one of them. But ultimately, if it works, as I believe, it starts with this sort of discussion, because if Putin says no, we're going to continue the war, there's not going to be any meeting with Ukraine. There's not going to be any Zelensky involvement, and the noose on Putin will only continue to tighten at Russia's expense. I mean, I don't see any beneficiary from this in any capacity, not certainly among the major parties involved, but not even third countries would be really, I think, erring in judgment if they saw this as some sort of opportunity for them. I think U.S. position especially will be to ensure that that's not exploited.
Just one quick follow-up question to something you said, and that is, you're saying that if in case the meeting doesn't go well, many experts have said that eventually Trump is going to tire out of it and say, I'm not going to have anything to do with Ukraine, even if Putin doesn't stop the war.
We were at that point. We already went through the point where we're like, look, we've done what we could do to bring these two parties together. There's not going to be a failure on the United States or on President Trump. President Trump succeeded in getting Putin to the meeting. Now we're reliant on a man that, frankly, is responsible and responsive to his own people, to Russian oligarchs. Frankly, that's why he's in this delegation today.
Okay, let me go to Fred Weir with that. Fred, you believe that you get what Mr. Jones is saying?
No different for the United States today. It would be unfortunate for the entire world if it doesn't go well. Everyone's got to hope that it does go well, but hope alone, it rarely gets things done.
So if it doesn't go well, it's all on Putin. That's what I hear you saying, Mr. Jones. Mr. Weir, your thoughts on that?
Well, as I said, the Russian foreign policy community seems a bit discombobulated by this summit meeting, the way it was sprung, quite unexpected, and the ambiguity that surrounds it. Nobody, I have a lot of contacts who are people who are well connected. Not one of them was willing to venture a prediction for how this will come out. But as for how it looks to the Russian people, to the Russian elites, it looks great. When Trump came in and opened the window of diplomacy to Russia after 3 years of isolation and full court press of the West against Russia, that vindicated Putin's point of view in the eyes of most Russians, many Russians, people I know, and his arriving in Alaska and sitting down with Trump will play really well. I know I'm sitting here with Russian media on my screens, and this is what they are all covering right now. Putin on his way to Alaska to meet with Trump. So whatever comes out, Putin will look good. And if there is a plan on the American side, that is some kind of an outline solution for Ukraine, which Russian experts insist was sort of agreed in principle with Witkoff a week ago, then they might come out with that. Beyond that, the Russians will see it as a huge victory if they if they continue the dialogue with the United States, if they expand it to other fields, arms control, Arctic cooperation, other economic projects. There's a lot of unused capacity, let's call it, in the American-Russian relationship. They could really develop that relationship a long way if they had the will. And so as you say, the war must end. And there too, I got to tell you that the perception of Russian elites is that they are winning the war. Slowly but surely, it's a war of attrition. It's like an arm wrestling contest. There can be very little movement for a long time, and then one side collapses. If you read the newspapers and if you read all those Telegram channels of war correspondents, Ukrainian ones, Russian ones, Right now, it looks like the Ukrainian side is starting to collapse. And so anyway, that's what the Russians perceive. So if no agreement can be hammered out, or if the Ukrainians refuse it, they will stay on the battlefield. I can't believe some of the things people say about Russia is collapsing. Russian economy can't sustain this war. They've been saying that for 3.5 years. It's never been right. And I think it's never been less right. As far as I can see, the Russian economy is not booming, far from booming, but it's fine. It's not contracting. It's certainly not collapsing. And Russian public opinion, though hardly enthusiastic, I don't know anyone who is gung-ho for this war, but I know lots of people, even people who used to be pro-Western liberal types, who say, well, we're in it, so we have to win it. And that's their attitude. So I think,
And
Putin,
optic-wise, you feel that Putin and Trump, this summit, in terms of optics, it shows its benefit Putin in the long run, or in the, even in the short term.
No, it's good for Putin. And if they do make some constructive agreements, normalize relations, get some economic cooperation going, it's good for the world.
Interesting, of course. Let me just come to you, Abhijit. We've heard from John. Mr. John says that it's advantage Trump. Mr. Weir says it's advantage Putin. Let me come to you from an objective viewpoint. In terms of optics, you are the world. Sitting here in New Delhi, tell me, in terms of optics, who's got the better hand ahead of the summit?
Look, they both have good hands. The only person coming out a loser in all of this seems to be Zelensky. He's not been invited to the big table. To quote Winston Churchill at the Yalta conference, it wasn't a meeting of the big three, it was 2.5, and the half was very aware who the half was. So it's a bit like that. Here, it's not even a half. It's just 2 plus 0, and the 0 is very clearly aware of who he is. Michael is absolutely right. Trump could come out looking very good if there is an agreement. And the problem with an agreement between 2 plus 0 is the 0 then gets massive pressure put on them to agree to the terms that the big two have negotiated. I hate using that word Munich because, that is such an inappropriate term out here. The Russians aren't fascists. Putin isn't Hitler, despite what the West wants you to believe. But those are the general dynamics going on there. Fred is also right. Imagine where Russia was a year back under the Biden administration, and look where they are today. Putin, who was, Russians were barred from flying over Europe, everything, is now going to be landing on American soil, the former Imperial Russian territory of Alaska, having a meeting with the American president. Tell me how that doesn't look good. You have India doubling down and refusing to go in for artificial purchases that aren't in line with market realities.
Right.
How does that look bad for Putin? He's clearly got good allies. He's got a good hand. He can actually walk away from today without losing face. Remember, a no from Putin doesn't lose face for Putin. A no from Putin does lose face for Trump because Trump has put so much investment into being the peace president.
Yeah.
Is it a fatal loss? No. Is it going to prick his ego? Yes.
All right. On that note, you've been the true India in this studio discussion. Basically, multi-aligned yourself. You've said a yes to Mr. Jones. Also, you've said a yes to Mr. Weir. Also, true to our foreign policy today of being aligned wherever our national interest is. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Thank you, Fred Weir. Thank you, Abhijit, for this thing. Let's see what happens. It's just another couple of hours. In a short while from now, Trump and Putin will be face-to-face in Alaska. They'll have a quiet meeting first between themselves, a one-on-one, nobody, no press, no world eyes watching. Let's see what happens. The last time it happened was in Helsinki, where you saw afterwards in the press conference, Trump actually going ahead and saying that maybe America got it wrong in terms of Russian interference in the elections. So that was a big win for Putin at that time. Let's see who wins this one. As all three of you are saying, there are no winners and losers. The only losers, apparently, it seems, if the Ukraine war ends, frankly, even the Ukrainian people will be winners. So let's see. Let's hope that this war ends and there is peace going forward, because all this nuclear talk that everybody's been doing, all the world leaders and everyone, has really got me scared. I don't know about you guys, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.